you asked a simple question and we gave you almost a 20-minute response. But Frank raised some really important issues and I just did want to add to them. Firstly, there's two things I want to make. Firstly, sometimes we get kind of really negative reviewer comments back, which we feel are a bit harsh, we feel are unjust. And as editors, we don't edit them. I've never edited a reviewer's comments, not as in I've never changed words in their sentences or anything like that. That's unethical. But I have added, as editors, we've added comments saying, we draw your attention to reviewer 2 who makes some very, very strong comments, and we don't necessarily support all those comments. We feel that they're being a bit excessive and so on. So we encourage you to, read the issue they raise, but don't be too upset. So we actually do sometimes say that. It's rare. It's rare because, and this is my second point, and the point that Frank made first, in IAPA, we're here because we love impact assessment. We're all volunteers. We're volunteers, authors are volunteers, reviewers are volunteers. Why are we doing this? We're giving up our valuable time because we care. And generally speaking, most people are very positive, and we do try our best to help. And often papers come in and Francois and I will actually make comments directly with the author about how it could be improved before we'll send it out for review. Because if it hasn't got some of those key things we talked about, like clear introduction and clear method, a message for the practitioners, we don't waste our reviewers' time. They're volunteers. We don't want to give them a paper we know that they're going to go about. So we actually initially send it back to the author for reworking and then go.
I think the partly answers.
Okay. Who else has a query? Anyone else?
Yeah, he does one. Ross, Bill, he is saying yes.
Well, anybody allowed to actually have one, but I didn't raise it.
Sorry.
You're next.
My question is about the purpose. You've raised that it should be, and you've said it should be very early, as quickly as possible. And the purpose of the paper is, will it be, usually if you write an introduction, you explain the problem, and then right at the end of the introduction you'll have the purpose. But I look at this, let's say, best paper 1, and already on the very first page you can see the clear purpose. Will it be your advice as the panel to bring it right onto the very first page?
Please. Please let me answer this one. I'm glad you raised that. Fantastic question. Okay, the best paper, if you've all got a copy in your book, if you get it out, if you've got it with you, it would be really handy to get it out and put it in front of you. Because this is an interesting, no you don't, you're not all rushing to get your papers out. There's only one of you who've got it. Dash. It's in your delegate bag. Yeah, it should be.
I'm the unlucky one.
Okay, well I'll just quickly explain a couple of things about this, and I know you can't see it, but I'll explain a few things that are really important. This, the question was, how soon should the...
The solid roots branching out part.
It's in the middle of the branch out part?
Yeah, solid roots branching out is right in there.
Yeah, okay. So some of you have actually got it now. Okay, this paper was called Illustrating Integrated Sustainability and Resilience-Based Assessments, a small-scale biodiesel project in Barbados. Now, this is a classic. This is just like EIA in Western Australia. Who's going to read a paper about Barbados? No one. But Barbados is the last word in the title, because what it's about, it's about illustrating integrated sustainability. Who's interested in integrated sustainability? Well, I am. So that's an interesting, the title is very active. And then if you look at the paper, on the very first page, you look at the first sentence, it says, 2 of the most significant challenges facing impact assessment in the 21st century are the needs to reverse trends towards deeper unsustainability and to address the unavoidable interconnections, feedbacks and uncertainties that typify complex social ecological systems. So, right in that very first sentence, it's talking about sustainability. We review tens or dozens of academic literature, but we do think it's appropriate to cite these 1 or 2 key things. And here they are. We actually often even provide those references to the authors. We actually email a PDF of those papers and say, look, what you're saying is very relevant to what Barry Sadler said in the effectiveness study. So just make a mention of that, and that grounds your work in that bigger picture, and that'll be fine.
Just to elaborate on the paper that I wrote that was really based on my historical practices, there's one more thing you should know, and that is before I submitted it, I talked to the editor of IAPA, Chris Wood, and I described this paper that I had in my head, and I said, would you consider it? And he said, just what Angus said earlier today. He said, we would, but you must have some lessons, some stories to convey. And of course, I couldn't write a paper without lessons anyway. And so I did write it that way. But I did, because I knew it was unconventional, I did talk to the editor in advance. In that case, I actually met him at one of these conferences, but emailing him would work just as well.
Thank you. Just a very quick question. If you can share with us the question that I'm going to ask you. What is the rate of rejection of papers? If you can share that.
He has that statistic at his fingertips.
45%.
Used to be 22.
No, we one of the things that happens at the IAA conference is that the editorial board meets for its annual general meeting, and the editors have to prepare a report, and we don't really know what to report, but we report on how many papers we receive and how many were published in the last 12 months and that sort of thing. And it did turn out that in the last 14 months, because the last anyway, our reporting period was about 12 or 14 months, that it actually ended up being about 45%. But it's a bit of a meaningless number, because that doesn't count the 12 papers that are currently under review at the moment, which would affect those statistics, and nor does it realise the fact that several of those papers were nothing about impact assessment. So it's just a meaningless statistic. We had something about rice paddies in India, the use of genetically modified rice crops in India, and we just went, and they had the word impact in there somewhere, but it was nothing to do with impact assessment in the sense of us. So we just, they submitted the paper, we lodged it, we recorded it, we immediately emailed back to the author and said, sorry, it's unacceptable for our journal. In other words, it's an outright rejection, and refer it on, suggest that they contact an agricultural journal or an Indian journal or something, but we couldn't help them with that directly. So that's just an example of how that can happen. But
Any other questions, please?
This is more from your experience as authors. How do you actually deal with cases where you get reviewers' comment which are quite diametrically opposite?
yeah, I could talk about them.
Frank, you're going to take it first?
So the first thing to realise is reviewers are fallible human beings. And reviewers are important people to a journal, and you should try to find the best in what reviewers are trying to do. Good reviewers help you tell your story better, right? So it's important to take what reviewers say seriously. At the same time, it's important to have faith in your own paper and to consider carefully what the reviewers are saying, but realise that they're suggestions. And if you think that the reviewer has misunderstood, you have two options. One is to say, what is it about the way I wrote my paper that has led the reviewer to get it wrong? Right? Just because the reviewer got it wrong doesn't mean to say that you didn't write the paper as well as you could have. So first of all, think, why was it that the reviewer came to this wrong conclusion? What could you have written better? And the second thing is, if you're really sure that they haven't read the paper properly and that you really are clear, then you write to the editor in response to the reviewer's comments and you say, in our response to let me backtrack a minute. So when you respond to when you resubmit your article to a journal, you should provide a new version of the paper, but you should also write a separate letter to the editors telling them how you have dealt with the reviewer's comments. And the best way to do that actually is a cut and paste. You have the reviewer's comments and you have your response. You do not have to do everything the reviewers tell you to. You use your own judgment in relation to whether the comment was helpful or not. And the editor's job is to adjudicate in the way in which you respond to the reviewers. So when you think the reviewers got it wrong, you explain to the editor that, in your opinion, the reviewer has it wrong. The reviewer has it wrong because such and such and such and such, and you explain. And they will consider your response and deal with it that way. Now, when you have conflicting opinions between two different reviewers, it makes your job easier there because you pick and choose which comments you want to deal with. Yes. And you can use the comments of one reviewer to help you respond to the comments of the other reviewer. If one reviewer tells you to delete section A, but the other reviewer says section A was great, then you can just say to the editor, well, since one reviewer said it was good, and I think it's good, I think it should stay. Right? So it's always the case, actually. I mean, it's quite common that the reviewers contradict each other, because reviewers too often approach a paper from their personal perspective. In my job as a reviewer, I try to say, what is the story that the author is trying to write? And I suspend my personal judgment in terms of my own perspective, and I say, if this is what the purpose of the paper is from the author's perspective, is the author making that argument adequately? That's what I try to do. Some reviewers come to the article from their own perspective, and that's where you need to use a bit of common sense in terms of how you respond. And the editors, they're pretty good with common sense as well. And if you consider their comments carefully from the reviewers and you respond to them effectively, then they will accept what you've said.
Just a quick one. My only advice would be try to accommodate the reviewer comments. Don't rubbish the reviewer back to the editors, because that doesn't go off well. Yeah. And my personal experience with writing is that the reviewers are right more often than not. And I think the advice from Frank to actually leave the comments for a day or two or even a week and then get back to them is very, very good. Because you do get emotionally attached to your work of art and your maybe your PhD paper or a paper from your PhD which has got blood and tears all over it. So you don't necessarily deal well with criticism on that. But to see it in a positive light, how are these reviewer comments actually improving my paper? And if you look at it, or if you approach it from that perspective, then you get some positive energy into actually rewriting the paper, and you'll improve your paper more often than not.
Generally, usually there's no such thing as a bad reviewer's comment, in the sense that it does something in you as the author, and that's usually a good thing. I just want to tell one story. It was my PhD, it was my blood, sweat and tears, it was the paper in the top journal, and one of the reviewers, I know who the reviewer was actually because he identified himself, and he is a member of our community, but I won't mention his name. And I was really looking forward to his feedback. When I knew who it was, I was really impressed because this guy was the guru in the field. And he thought the paper was terrible. Now the paper was about EIA and environmental management. And I had my own I assumed everybody knew what environmental management meant, because of course it means what I think it means. And what it was that this reviewer had a different interpretation of the word environmental management. And that meant that everything he saw in the paper was just awful for him. And as soon as I realized that it was just about poor communication by me on a simple word like environmental management, I hadn't clearly identified and defined my meaning of that word in the context of my paper, which was about Western Australia. And as soon as I did that, all the reviewer comments that were negative and a problem just disappeared. So that was a fantastic lesson about communication. Never assume anybody understands anything you write unless you've explained it.